Going back to the book of Mark this morning, continue to follow this life of Jesus as told by Mark. Sometimes when you're looking at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you're trying to put all the events in sequence, it can get difficult to know, well, wait a minute, did this come first or that event, and how do you fix that across those books? But you see, they weren't necessarily writing to put things in sequence. All three of them generally are in a sequence, but not necessarily. And you take the book of Mark. You can divide the book of Mark into three sections. And the first section has mostly to do with Jesus' work in Galilee. The second section has to do with his journey from Galilee to Jerusalem on his way to be crucified. It's sort of a death march that we have. And then the third section has to do with him coming to Jerusalem in the final week that's going to end now with his resurrection. But these things are not necessarily in chronological order. But if you're looking at those three divisions in the book of Mark, well, the third division would begin here at the beginning of chapter 11, when Jesus comes to Jerusalem. He comes as their king, but he's not like normal kings. You know, kings like to ride in on horses, don't they? I mean, they'll get a big stallion and a horse. You look at our president. When he comes to town, what does he come? He'll come in Air Force One, and then he'll get in a limousine, and he'll have all these Secret Service on motorcycles and everything, and it's a big event for the president to come through. What if he came through in an old pickup truck? You know, that's not what you'd expect out of the president of the United States, driving an old, maybe an old wore-out F-100, coming through town. Well, that's what Jesus did. He's coming to Jerusalem as the king. But he's not coming in on a big white stallion, and with chariots and soldiers and all. He's going to be coming in riding on a colt. That's going to tell us something about the kind of king that Jesus is going to be, and the kind of king that he is. So we'll look at this. Now, this story about Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a colt, it's told by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to be following Mark. I'm going to bring some things in from those others. But all the events of Christ's life are not told by all four of those. When you find something that is told by Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, that raises our interest in that event, doesn't it? There's something significant here that we don't want to miss. If they all four thought, I need to make sure I include that in the testimony I'm providing so that people can believe. And so all four writers tell of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on this colt. Let's look at what Mark says. Mark 11 and verse 1. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem and to Bethpage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sendeth forth two of his disciples and said to them, Go your way into the village over against you, and soon as ye be entered into it, ye shall find a colt tied, whereupon never man sat. Loose him and bring him. And if any man say unto you, Why do you this? Say ye that the Lord hath need of him, and straightway he'll send him thither. And they went their way and found the colt tied by the door without in a place where two ways met. And they loosed him. And certain of them that stood there said unto them, What do ye, loosing the colt? And they said unto them, Even as Jesus had commanded. And they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus, and cast their garments upon him, and he sat upon him. And many spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches off the trees and strawed them in the way. And they that went before And they that followed cried, saying, Hosanna, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Blessed be the kingdom of our father David that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. And Jesus entered into Jerusalem and into the temple. And when he looked round about upon all things, now it was eventime was come, he went out into Bethany with the 12. A colt. Jake, look at that little colt up there. You see that? That little colt, that's a donkey. Maverick, look at there. Wouldn't you like to ride one of those? You know, I like those names, don't you? Maverick and Jake. I tell you, we could have a real shoot 'em up here someday with Maverick and Jake and all these good cowboy names, you know. But cowboys like to ride horses, but, you know, that'd be fun to ride a little colt like that, wouldn't it? That is the colt of a donkey. You know what a male donkey is called? It's a jack, isn't it? And a female, that's a jenny, a jack and a jenny. And in 1611, what did they call them? They said, well, that's an ass. But now I know when I said that, some of you are thinking, oh, well, that word. See, that word has come to be a very pejorative slang word, and so we don't use that word much anymore. And probably good because of the connotations of that word. Instead, the modern versions will say donkey. Now that's what it is. It's a donkey. It's just a different word. There's another word for this animal. You've heard of a burro? It's kind of what they call them over in the southwest part of the country. A beast of burden, a burro, you know. So it's got a lot of different names. This text is going to call it a colt. Now, you might think a colt is of a young horse. It's the same kind of, I don't know what scientific classification, I think family, genus, species, something like that. It's in that same family, and it's a colt, the foaled of an ass is what it's called in the Old Testament, and what Matthew identifies it as. So it's a young donkey. Now, it had to be old enough to ride on. It wouldn't just be a newborn. It had to be, and its mother was there. The jenny was there with this young donkey. That little donkey had grown up, spent all its time with this mother jenny, wouldn't it? And as I was reading this, I found it interesting that if you're trying to take an animal that has never been ridden, it can get real nervous to think, what is this? Somebody's trying to ride me. It can be nervous. And one of the ways you can calm an animal that has never been ridden is to have in company with you an animal that is very comfortable with what you're doing and that animal is very comfortable with. And so here's this colt that has never been ridden, and Jesus is going to ride him, and it's going to be there in the company of its mother. Well, it had always grown up. Evidently, this had always been with his mother, and maybe that's part of what calms the little colt. Now, there'd be other reasons, of course, Jesus doing this. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could read into this as how Jesus could ride an animal that's never ridden, but that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Since its mother was right there, and maybe that calmed it for what event is about to take place. So we're going to be reading about this colt. It's a humble-looking little beast, isn't it? I mean, it just has a look of humility about it, and it was a common animal among the working people. And they'd use it for burdens. They'd use it for riding. People didn't have horses very commonly. They would pull their plows and their heavy loads with oxen. And if they had long distances, they could use camels. But you had to really have some substance to camel. This was a very common beast of burden, a domesticated animal among the people. And that's what Jesus is going to ride to Jerusalem. Now, it's the fulfillment of prophecy. Matthew and Luke both reference the prophecy. It's found in the book of Zechariah. And in context, Zechariah has been writing about a great king that is going to come and force his way and impose his way upon the people. Now, when I read what Zechariah is talking about, it sounds like to me Zechariah is talking about Alexander the Great, who's going to come through and just impose his will on the people. But in that context, it talks about another king. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout. Well, we're going to hear shouting in this. Said, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, having salvation, lowly. You don't usually think of kings as being lowly, but Jesus says, I am meek and lowly in heart. He comes lowly. You know, Jesus can be lowly. We can be lowly, can't we? Lowly. Riding upon an ass and upon the colt, the foal of an ass. And then he says this, I'll cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem. There's a horse mentioned right after this prophecy. It's not going to be about horses. That's for these kings like Alexander the Great that come in. We're not going to have the horses. The battle bow shall be cut off. He shall speak peace to the heathen. And his dominion shall be from sea even to the sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. Jesus is not going to impose himself as king in this world. He'll come in peace. He will be lowly. The world will be drawn to him. That was the old prophecy. It's fulfilled in the manner in which Jesus comes to Jerusalem. Now here's how it goes. Here's this trip. They came nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethpage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. He sendeth forth two of his disciples. We've got 4 geographical locations there. And I like, especially since I've been to Israel, it just fascinates me to pull out maps and find these places and see. Here's the route they think they took. That red line, you see Bethany? They would have come to Bethany, coming up from Jericho, come to Bethany. And Bethany is where Jesus would spend his nights and evenings when he was at Jerusalem in this week that is ahead. He would return to Bethany. On the way between Bethany and Jerusalem is a little village of Bethpage. And there would be a road coming down from that direction that met there at Bethpage just as you're getting into town. And so it all fits. It all fits. What you find on the map fits what you read in the book. And then they would go to Jerusalem and up the little windy way then into the temple. While Lori and I were there, we walked down that steep road that goes from Bethpage down toward Jerusalem past the Garden of Gethsemane. It's a real steep Roman road going down that way, and the old pavement is still there. You can walk on that old Roman pavement going down the Mount of Olives toward Jerusalem. Now, he said to them, here's the instructions, go thy way into the village over against you. As soon as ye be entered into it, ye shall find a colt tied, whereupon every man said, loose him and bring him. So we can that's what people would do. You know, the Amish, a lot of the stores like Walmart, they'll have a place where the Amish can tie their horses up in the parking lot, you know. Well, that would be common. You'd ride your little donkey to town, and then while you go back, you'd tie it up. Now, you're going to find one of those there. Now, as soon as you enter town, you'll see this. You loose him and bring him to me. And if any man say, why are you doing this? You'll say, the Lord hath need of him. And straightway he'll send him further. Well, they went their way and found the colt tied by the door without in a place where 2 ways met. They loosed him. Certain of them that stood there said unto them, what do you, loosing the colt? And they said, even as Jesus had commanded. And they let him go. They did just what Jesus said. It's interesting, Jesus knew that colt would be there, didn't he? He told them just what to say, and he knew the reaction they would receive. Jesus knows. We can do what Jesus says. He knows what's out there in front of us that we may not know. He knows. And we can just do just as He commands. It is very likely that news of Jesus had already gone before Him. Jesus, on His way down, a great multitude had already been following Him. Remember when He came through Jericho, there was the great multitude, and that's why Bartimaeus was saying, Lord, Lord, save me, and started that yell right there. And they were trying to hush him up. And the news was going before. Jesus is coming. Jesus of Galilee, that prophet of Galilee, is coming to Jerusalem. They knew He would be coming this way. So these men probably knew, well, these must be Jesus' disciples. That's who the Lord we're talking about. We heard He was coming this way. And if He needs this colt, take him. Jesus was borrowing this colt from that man. And the owners thereof, they knew that Jesus was coming. So let him borrow that colt and let him use it as he needs. So they did just what Jesus said. Now they brought the colt to Jesus and cast their garments on him. See, they'd have outer garments, and they'd take that, and the little colt didn't have a saddle. See? So here's how they do it, Maverick. They'd take their outer garments and they'd put it across, and see, you can just sit right there across that colt, so he wouldn't have to ride right there on his back. He could ride it like he's, sort of like we'd say a saddle. They'd put garments across. Well, people saw them do that, and they were excited about Jesus coming. So put those garments over, and many, then they took their garments. Here's what they did. Look at this, Maverick. They took their garments and they put them down on the ground so the little donkey could just walk. Oh, Laura's not going to like that. But the little donkey could just walk right across the garment. And that way the colt, he wouldn't even have to touch the ground. It's kind of like we say when we roll out the red carpet. I mean, they were just doing this to honor Jesus. And when they saw the disciples somebody put their garment in the way, and evidently others, we're going to do it too. And so they laid their garments, but not only that, they used the branches of trees. And so the others cut down branches off the trees and strawed them in the way. Well, if you think, boy, how are you going to walk through all those branches? They were palm branches. Now we know that from the book of John. On the next day, John 12 and verse 12, on the next day, much people that were coming to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. Now they would lie flat like a mat, and so they had these palm trees. When we get close to Easter, they decide when Easter is every year based on the Passover, and we can look at the calendar and the Passover, you can tell by the equinox and the moon and the instructions God gave when that Passover week falls each year. It's not always the same week, is it? It moves around, but the end of that Passover week would be the Sunday Jesus rose from the dead. Now, we call that Easter on our calendars. That's not what the Bible calls that day, but that's what we call that day for various reasons. But we can kind of align that. But if you look, the Sunday before what we'll call Easter Sunday is Palm Sunday on the calendar. The reason it's called Palm Sunday is because that was the day that Jesus came to Jerusalem, and they took the palm branches and laid them in the road. Now that's just what men do and call it. That's not, the Bible doesn't tell us to call it that day, but when you hear about Palm Sunday, that's what they're talking about. That day that began that last week of Jesus. This is the week he will be crucified and buried And then that next first day of the week, he's going to rise from the dead. But this is that day they call Palm Sunday. Well, here's what they were crying as he comes in. Hosanna! Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Blessed be the kingdom of our father David, that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna. What's that? That is an old Hebrew word, maybe Aramaic word now, but what the meaning of the word is, save us now. See, the Jews, they didn't like these Romans imposing their will on them. And a lot of them were looking for a Messiah that would come to Jerusalem and set up an earthly kingdom and throw off this yoke and save them from the Romans. And they thought that would be wonderful. That may have been what they were thinking Jesus was going to do. Many at that time thought that's the kind of kingdom that was coming. Jesus was coming with a much greater salvation and a much greater kingdom that many of them could not have imagined. It was a salvation from sin, and it was a spiritual kingdom he was going to establish. But they were probably, many of them, thinking in these earthly terms. Now, when they're doing this, they're singing a song from the book of the Psalms. There's a section of the Psalms, Psalm 113 to Psalm 118, that is traditionally called the Hallel, the praise. And at the end, they would sing this. The historians tell us Jews would often be singing this as they're coming up to that Passover week. Now, at the very end of this Hallel, and Psalm 118, I said 25, 26, but look at 22. The stone which the builders refused has become the head of the corner. This is the Lord's doing, it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day which the Lord hath made. We'll rejoice and be glad in it. The apostles are later going to tell us that's talking about Jesus. But then this is the part they're singing when he comes into Jerusalem. Save now. That's Hosanna. Save now, I beseech thee, O Lord. O Lord, I beseech thee, send now prosperity. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. They're singing the last verses of that Hallel that they would sing at that time and attributing that to Jesus. They add this, blessed be the kingdom of our father David. They put that in there. They're recognizing this Jesus, he's the Messiah. Oh, they are right about that. But they're wrong about the nature of that Messiah and the nature of that kingdom. But he was the Messiah to come to establish his kingdom. Jesus entered into Jerusalem and into the temple. He looked round about on all things. Well, the road went right up to the gate going into the temple. I think Lori took this picture. It may have been Garland Robinson took it. We were there together. Did you take it? That if you see that yellow, let's see if I can see that yellow raincoat up there. That's me. That's me. I went right up to the corner. Right up to the corner. Those old steps were the steps Jesus would have taken on his way into the temple. The wall was taken down and it's been rebuilt, but those steps were there. And you can walk up those steps. But the gate, you don't see a gate there, do you? He goes into the gate of the temple. You see that? Looks like a building coming out from that wall. The Muslims built that. They built a mosque right where that gate is supposed to be. You know why they did that? Because they'd heard from the Jews and they'd heard from the Christians that when the Messiah comes, he's going to come through that gate into the temple. So they stopped that, didn't they? They put them up. They are so wrong in so many ways. They're too late. He already did it. He went through that gate. They can't go back and change history, can they? But when he comes again, he's not going to come. He's not going to come there. This prophecy had been fulfilled. But it's interesting that they built a mosque right there. You can go to that corner, stand in that corner, and that's probably about as close as you can come to where Jesus would have walked going into that temple. But it's fascinating to me that is even there. Luke tells us when he got there, walked into the temple grounds, not just the temple building, but the temple. He looked all around at everything. And he wept. He saw all the joy of all these people around him, but they didn't understand. They didn't know. There was all this joy on the outside of who Jesus was, but there's all this grief on the inside. Because he knew, this is the week. They're going to crucify me. One of these days, in this generation, all of this will be gone. And he saw the calamity of the people, the false hope they had, and the grief it would bring them. And he wept over that. I think that's interesting. Just like he knew that colt would be tied, he knew what lay ahead. And it was more ominous materially than they could think. And then it says, now eventide was come, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Mark doesn't tell us what he did when he got there, and this is where some of the chronology can get confused, but we're going to follow Mark's line of events as we read through this. But he returned to Bethany, he spent the night, and now the week had begun. Now this is something different. All the way through the book of Mark, we've been seeing something that seems a little strange. He would heal a man, and then he'd say, now don't tell everyone I did this. The crowds would come to him, and he would preach to them, and then he'd get on a ship and slip away so that they couldn't follow him. He would avoid, the multitudes were coming. He couldn't stop that, but he avoided the acclaim of the multitudes and did his work, and the word spread everywhere he was doing it, but he wasn't out blazing it and advertising. He was telling them just kind of keep it quiet. The time's not yet. The time is not yet, but now it's changed. He knew. He could have come to Jerusalem like he had the last time he came and come under cover in quietness, and they didn't know he was there till he stood up and started preaching, but not this time. Now he's embracing the accolades of the multitude and letting himself be made that public spectacle which he had avoided. Because the hour had come. And now he would pass through this week and endure this humiliation and bring salvation to the world. How do we honor the king? 3 ways the king was honored here that maybe we can take and say, we're going to honor the king too. One was they did do what he says. That's what the apostles did. He said, go, find the colt tied, bring him. If they say this is what you say. They did as he commanded. You want to honor Jesus? Here's how you do it. You do what he says. That's how you bring him honor. Another way they honored the king, the men that owned the donkey, said, well, the Lord has need of him. Let him go. Let him go. That's what we can do. Look at the blessings God has given us. Our attitude should be, but if the Lord needs them, he can have them. He can have them. Let them go. Let the Lord use these things that we're the owners of the colt, but we can let it go. The Lord has need of it. And the things that we have, we honor the Lord with our substance, don't we? Another way to honor the Lord is to sing his praises. Save now, Hosanna in the high. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. We honor the Lord when we gather together to worship and to sing songs of praise in his name. So let's learn how to honor the Lord as the disciples, as the owner of the colt, And as the multitudes rejoiced as he came in, you honor the Lord when you say, I believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. You honor the Lord when you say, I want to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of our sins. You honor the Lord when you live that life that he teaches us to live and embrace that faith and that hope that we have. And if this morning you're ready to honor the Lord, then in humility, in lowliness, come forward as we stand and sing.